I mentioned that the PM has sent Richard Marles as his proxy. Do you think the PM should have attended? And secondly, is Australia doing enough to support NATO in this effort?
Well, short answer is, of course, the PM should have attended. I'm sure Deputy Prime Minister and Defence Minister Richard Marles will do a great job. But the fact is that the IP4, those 4 Indo-Pacific states that are associate partners to NATO, South Korea, Japan, Australia and New Zealand, those 3 states, South Korea, Japan and New Zealand, all sent their political leaders. We sent the Deputy Prime Minister and Defence Minister. I think Prime Minister Albanese should have made the effort, given the importance of this summit and given the context at which it's occurring, and the fact that NATO is increasingly playing a role in the Indo-Pacific. And in terms of Australian assistance to Ukraine, of course we should lift it. We should dramatically lift it in terms of what we can offer them. We're about to retire the Aussie Tiger helicopters and replace them with the Apache attack helicopter. Why not give the Aussie Tiger helicopter to Ukraine and allow them to have a new attack helicopter capability that they can use to attack Russian forces? The Albanese government needs to consider all requests coming from Ukraine and not just dismiss them outright.
Now, of course, Donald Trump is not part of the summit, but he would be at the forefront of everybody's minds because we know he's not a big fan of NATO, and yet there's a good chance he'll be elected come November. So surely NATO leaders would have to be planning for a Trump presidency.
I think they are, and I think you'll notice that Richard Marles and his delegation are meeting with members of the Trump team. I think that's entirely appropriate. I think that after the disastrous performance of President Biden in the CNN debate, the chances of a Biden victory in November are very slim indeed. So therefore, NATO as an alliance needs to prepare for a second Trump administration. Trump will put intense pressure on NATO to lift its game in terms of defence spending and contributions to European security, and I think Europe should do this. And I think what you're seeing is European states starting to essentially plan for increased defence spending, not just to placate Trump, but prepare for also the possibility that Russia, if it secures its victory in Ukraine, would then turn its attentions to NATO. And you have the prospect that a Russian victory in Ukraine could then set the stage for a much bigger and much more dangerous war in Europe a year or 2 later.
Just before you go, the Signals Directorate yesterday released the details of Chinese hackers backed by Beijing, responsible for a number of hacks in Australia. It's great the government's been forthcoming about what the Chinese are up to, but unless pressure is put on Beijing over this sort of activity, and that begs the question, what sort of pressure could we apply? But what's the point of releasing this information if that's all it is, just releasing the information?
The point is to alert the Australian community in terms of government organisations, private sector, individual users to the threat that Chinese cyber warfare capabilities pose. This was a group called APT-40 that was operating on behalf of the Chinese government. So this was essentially a Chinese government cyber warfare attack on Australia. And I think that the Australian Signals Directorate did the right thing by highlighting this attack, by making it clear to the Australian public what is going on. And you're right, obviously we ideally would like to put pressure on China to get them to cease and desist, but we have to accept the fact that China is never going to cease and desist. So the best thing we can do is defend against these sorts of attacks. The only way we can do that is to shine a spotlight on Chinese activities and defend against them.
Malcolm Davis, appreciate your time this evening.